Architecting Azure with Mike Martin.
The Azure DevOps Podcast is a show for developers and DevOps professionals shipping software using Microsoft technologies. Each show brings you hard-hitting interviews with industry experts, innovating better methods, and sharing success stories. Listen on to learn how to increase quality, ship quickly, and operate well. And now your host, Jeffrey Palermo.
Welcome to the show. I'm your host, Jeffrey Palermo, and I love to help you and your teams move fast and deliver quality and to run your software with confidence in Azure, all while using everything that the .NET ecosystem has to offer. The podcast is sponsored by ClearMeasure, which is a full-service software architecture and engineering firm that empowers software projects. And my Architect Forums quick announcement, they're going strong. Signups for the next session are up. And there's plenty of learning materials out there for individual software developers, but not so much for people who are leading groups of software developers. So if you lead a software team and you're looking to collaborate with some of your peers out there in the industry, just go ahead and sign up at the link in the show notes. And by the way, we had a question. This isn't a paid service or anything. This is just a group of software team leaders getting together and we're learning off of each other. So the link is in the show notes. And for those of you looking for Programming with Palermo, my video podcast, you can just search for it in any of the directories and you'll be able to find it. Now, my guest today on the show is Mike Martin. Mike is an exceptional senior cloud solution architect and technical evangelist at Microsoft, and he has over 2 decades of experience in IT. He's an expert in coaching and leading teams and architecting, designing, and training systems. And as an Azure specialist for independent software vendors and partners, he's often the go-to person for all things related to Microsoft Cloud and application lifecycle management as well. And he's known as the perfect hybrid solution with his unique combination of expertise in both development and IT pro topics. He's involved in the Belgian Microsoft Azure Users Group, going back to January of 2012. And he's also been an active contributor to the community ever since, giving presentations and organizing events such as ITProceed, Techorama, and the Global Azure Bootcamp. And so he's done a lot of things, but his extensive knowledge and experience in Azure has earned him some numerous accolades. He's been recognized as Microsoft Azure MVP for 5 times. And he's also a Microsoft Azure advisor, gives guidance and insight to others in the community. And beyond the professional stuff, he's also passionate about giving back to the community and inspiring the next generation of technologists. And he has a lot of pleasure in introducing young people to the world of Microsoft and technology, and really likes to lend a helping hand to those in need. So, Mike, welcome to the show. So good to have you. How are you, sir?
Thank you, Jeffrey. I think you're baffled now because that's a mouthful, right? Introduction. But thank you for the kind words.
I think it's good for people to know who they're listening to because you've done a lot of things, and I think you'd probably still be, being recognized every year as a Microsoft MVP if you hadn't joined up to Microsoft and gotten promoted as a blue badge. So you've done so much.
I'd like to believe so. I'd like to believe so, but you never know, of course. You never know what criteria might change there, right? Maybe I didn't do enough, or maybe I didn't do just that one thing enough for that specific program group or whatever. You know how the program works. I mean, you've been in there yourself, so you typically know how that rocks can tumble.
I mean, think about how many software people are in our industry. It's a small group of people who run user groups, who speak at conferences, lead and organize conferences. I mean, that's a very small group of people. Most people just go to work and try to get software working. So
yeah, that's true, and that's already a handful.
Yeah, I want to get into some Azure topics, really, but you've done so much in your career. But I want to stop and just ask, can you highlight maybe a few key elements in your career that you think kind of transformed you and enabled you to work in the field that you're working on now and solving type of problems that you're working on now?
There's so many things. I mean, it all started off by just early in my career. I got lucky. enrolled into IT. I mean, now I'm showing age. I'm 27 years in.
Yeah, we're
So
all. It's good.
almost
It's all good.
showing age. And when I started, these were still the golden days before anything. The internet bubble was there, and all these things. And so that's all cool. I started without any diplomas and just assigned myself to a course, and that course was given by Public Services to make sure that new people could have a jump board into new ways of working. And they wouldn't give that course anymore because it was actually for web designers.
Mm-hmm.
And they said, well, you know what? We're not organizing that course anymore because it's too expensive and we don't believe in that internet thing. So go figure. Really, really a lot of funny. That was Belgian government, by the way, at that time. So you can imagine. So, and then I got forwarded to, they said, yeah, but we know a company that's actually training people for free. Maybe you can listen there. So I did a couple of interviews there. Didn't know that I was actually interviewing for a job. And the last thing the last interview that I had, the guy said, "Oh, well, you're in. You get a contract." I went,
"Nice.
I was just here for the training," and that was actually Unisys. You probably know them. They're the second largest mainframe provider in the world, and they still do. A successful company, Big Blue, but they're not. That's a long way.
Mm-hmm.
That's like 20 years ago since I passed their way. So that's the thing. But that formed my debut of career, and that was my first steps in the Microsoft world. That was VB Enterprise for you, man. That was like hardcore VB. We did Win32 API. We did Dan Appleman as my favorite author. We did the Microsoft Transaction Server. We did all these things. So COM, DCOM, all these concepts were coming to something which we didn't see before. And then the wonderful world of 2001 was there, and we got something new introduced, .NET. That is where I rolled into the .NET, and also give me a stepping stone into my next form of career, which gave me into other consultancy firms. But also, I got into contact with a small ISV at that time. They hired me for a year, and then, unfortunately, they were in financial problems, so they needed to fire me. They're still active and they were good people. They're still a successful ISV, but at that time they needed investor money and they couldn't afford, so they needed somebody from the investor. But that year gave me a lot of insights in how also running a small firm worked, how Business Insights worked on an ISV kind of side, and that formed me a little bit on how also software development and product development could be arisen. And then more consultancy companies came in. I went over from that small company to a company called Sogeti, which is a part of the Capgemini group.
And
from there out, I went into Kronos, which is the largest consultancy firm in Belgium. They are about 9,000 people big. But what happened in between is that I actually started leading software teams. I also did some systems management at the same time, did implementation at certain customers, started to live more with application lifecycle management. And all these events followed into the biggest event that happened then was 2009, when they announced in 2008 on the PDC this little thing called .NET services in the cloud. Remember that? So that was the first actually hidden notion of Azure. I remember Ray Ozzie talking about that. And in 2009, I actually got my hands on that. I was really early in that, and I started playing around with it. Cloud services came up, but we also had SQL services online and all these things. There was these other cool things in there, like a live mesh and Popfly. Remember those? I don't know whether you still remember those, but those are the meshing software where you can measure all these endpoints, and those were the first concept of REST APIs, and all these things made me want to do more with cloud. And this is where actually I got reborn as a true architect, because now I could combine everything that I gathered over this last 12 years. I could now adhere to into the next phase, which made me do cloud computing, cloud development, cloud design, and the platform evolved with me. And I got to be there from day one. So I can actually say, yeah, we grew up together from that point of view.
Yeah.
And nowadays I can say that I, without bragging, but I still try to keep up with every single change that we have at Microsoft, because now I'm blue badge. I made my dream come true. But it's really, for youngsters, it's really, really hard because they don't know typically what they're doing. And without being like giving a slap on the hand, cloud computing is like a very rigid and complex thing.
Yeah.
And I see a lot of people doing it wrong. And that is where my additional passion comes from, and where also my love for ISVs come from, because typically they have great ideas, great business ideas, and they have a business model that is like, oh, I got the next big fourth thing idea coming up, and let's do this. But if they don't get the guidance correctly on how they should proceed with that, and even build for their operations, they will at some point fail. I always give the analogy with you're sitting in a car going at 300 miles per hour.
Yeah.
There's a wall in front of you. And guess what? No brakes, no airbags, and no seatbelts. Have fun.
Not
bye. Good. And then I'm out. So that's how my life is now more focused on helping people designing, making sure that there's a notion of FINO, which is failure is no option. It's always imminent. It's always there. And I try to do the thing with resilient design, with resilient architectures, with designing for failure on every levels of software development, whether it's on the part of security, whether it's on the part of the coding that they're writing, whether it's on the infrastructure. All these things need to play along. It's really hard to do, but it's also a lot of fun. And then also keeping in mind that they need to become successful as an ISV. So that's, in a nutshell, how my career the last 27 years was formed and where I am today.
Awesome. There's a lot of topics here to dive into, but let me pick up the topic of just general resiliency or uptime, of the notion of, okay, I really can't afford to have downtime. It's not like I can have surprise and then tell the users to wait. And let's set the notion of scale to a side. Just let's say it's a school application, and just during the hours of the school day, we cannot have any downtime. It's got to work. It's not like we have a million, kids using it or whatnot. But so set scale aside, we just need to make sure that it doesn't go down, doesn't have any blips, because the class periods keep on moving on. So when you're thinking about the architecture of something to put into Azure, and let's just say it's a vanilla .NET 7 on top of SQL Server application, which is super simple application, but it's got to stay up. What are the options? How do you go through that thought process, and how should people look at that particular problem?
That's a good question. And it's funny that you immediately say, let's set scale aside. It's actually scale becomes an intrinsic part of it.
Okay.
Because for me, resiliency means that every layer can fail and scale independently. Because you said it yourself, it's about uptime.
Yeah.
And you want to make sure that all these elements can just do what they need to do without being interrupted in what they're doing. And if they are getting interrupted, making sure that they don't interrupt the others.
Okay.
So if you make each of the layers fail and scale independently, you can have these concept of circuit breakers, transient fault in there, and all these things applying like we do normal software. But now we can use concept of cloud. For instance, if you're doing, we start off by making sure that you have multiple availability zones without even talking about true availability zones. We talk about multi-regional deployments. We're talking about multiple deployments, just like we used to have in the past. The only thing is now that we don't probably need to have them 100% passive or active. It all comes down to how you're going to forward it, right? We have these concepts of cool concepts in any cloud. Like we have in Azure, we have Traffic Manager and Frontor, which can actually do load balancing based on the way traffic is coming in. We can offload it to multiple regions, or even for the failure part. Is that resilient? Maybe not, but it makes your uptime a little bit higher, right? So, and if you then take into account the way we designed Azure to be resilient, we have these concepts, of course, and I already mentioned availability zones, where we can pass through different services onto multiple zones of a data center region, where everybody can just, you're going to say, I'm going to deploy it into one zone or in 3 zones, and if one zone fails, it automatically will fail over to the other zone, or make sure that it immediately passes, or just keeps on passing, because also that sometimes happens depending on the service that you're talking to, in combination with intelligent operations, and in combination with projects like Tardigrade, which does a quick resilient setup of the underlying infrastructure. So it's all these things that come to play. If you keep in mind those design principles, and then you take into account things that can help you speed up, making sure that you have pass-through components, like, let's say, for instance, an event sourcing capability like Event Hub or a service bus, where you do or the CQRS or the event sourcing stuff, then you design really for resilience, because resilience is not about making sure that it is not going down, but also making sure that it can withstand the pressure. I always compare resilience with, there's a storm passing on an island. And what you get on when you walk on the beach of an island, you see palm trees. Typically, the typical image.
Yeah,
if we would have Dali here in the chat, it would say, "Draw me a beach of an island." You will see palm trees. And what's the typical image that you have after a storm or during a storm? You see these palm trees go like bending over.
Yeah,
totally.
Right.
Well, when the storm is gone, the trees go like,
yep,
and they're back up. That's the resilience, and that's how elasticity works. And this is pure cloud. So if that tree can get back up, or it can just withstand the pressure and still give you the image that it is a tree without breaking, that's resilient. That's true resilience. And that's the same with software. If you have a website and you can just fill out a form and you give the result back and saying, look, we are working on it, and we are working in it in a sync way, and we give you the result back in 20 seconds because we know there is, but that's just the way it works. We can make sure that it gets picked up by multiple workers, and we make those workers scale to make it more resilient at that point in time.
Okay.
Because at that point in time, we can do something like having KIDA in Azure Container Apps, or working with an additional function that can scale your that can use your auto scaling feature of app service, for instance. Things like that can make it into play. So scaling becomes a part of the resiliency.
Okay.
It's not the solution, but it becomes a part of it. And then, of course, also you need to play with all the different aspects of how complex you want to make your solution. I always go by the principle of KISS: keep it stupid and simple. Because if you overcomplexify, your resiliency will also be lowered, because there will be too many dependencies working into your software. And now you can say, yeah, but what's then the difference with the way we used to do it in the past? Well, in the past, it was we could do it, and we couldn't do it at the same time, because we had hardware that we were depending on. And today we have all these concepts where we can really work at scale, and we can really work at ease of focusing on the software and no longer working on the infrastructure. I always go back, if you're going to do design in cloud, please don't go doing what you did 20 years ago. Don't start deploying VMs and put your stuff on there. That's a bad way of doing cloud. That's not doing cloud. That's just expensive hosting.
That's just hosting.
Yeah, it's just hosting, but expensive one too. I mean, if you look at how expensive a VM is in Azure, we're expensive, but they're decent, and they're resilient in their own little way. Because those machines, we can have them at scale. But VMs don't scale, and they don't have the ease of the ease of management, and the ease of scalability and elasticity there. So that's a little bit the issue. And if you then take into account more PaaS services and use maybe some SaaS services into the mix, Of course, you then create a dependency on a third party where you don't know what the SLA will be or what the resilience will be on their behalf.
Mm-hmm.
But you get where I'm going, right?
Sure.
You are going to design keeping into account all these different aspects and making sure that you apply things like 12-factor success on apps, reliable web patterns, all these things. Put that into the mix, put it into a decent infrastructure between quotes, because infrastructure typically is being seen as an old VM style and networking all these components. But you want to see without that, you want to see what the capabilities of the platform can give you in that return, and this will give you a more design for failure. And there's always a failing option. I mean, we're all humans and we all make mistakes, and the platform can fail and something else can fail and your ISP can fail, and there's always something that can go wrong. And can you take away all the aspects of resiliency? No, you cannot, or not being resilient, but you can get as close as possible to 99%.
Yeah.
Many thanks to our podcast sponsor, ClearMeasure. ClearMeasure is a software architecture company that empowers clients' development teams to be self-sufficient, moving fast, delivering quality, and running their systems with confidence. Whether starting a new project or developing new technologies or techniques, ClearMeasure sets up your team to deliver world-class results. Learn more at www.clearmeasure.com. ClearMeasure, empowering software delivery. ClearMeasure is also happy to be a sponsor of the video podcast, Programming with Palermo. Watch, learn, and program alongside Chief Architect Jeffrey Palermo. Videos are added weekly and available on syndicated locations supporting video podcast or by visiting palermo.network. Tune in today.
Now, if you are a software as a service provider, then that's a certain mindset of how reliable you need to be and how resilient. But if you're building an application for your own organization and you know exactly how many people are going to be using it and you know their working hours, but you just trying to kind of put the blinders on for a little bit and you just want to make sure it's up, then how do you, and you coach people all the time, how do you coach people in the decision of the level of resilience? Certainly just throwing an app on app service and then ignoring it is probably not a recipe to avoid surprises, right? But at the same time, at what point do you say, "Oh, I'm going to have resiliency across Azure zones," and you know what? I need to have resiliency with Azure because Azure may go down, so I need to also be up on AWS and Rackspace and have. At some level, you say, "No, this is good enough for my organization where I know all of my users." How do you coach people through making the decision at what level, how far to go, where they're actually going to get a return on their investment?
Yeah. So the first thing that I typically do with them is not looking at the technology at all.
Okay.
I first look at their business model and what their promises are to their customers.
Mm-hmm.
And that is somewhat related to their technical impact. So I go with them and say, so how do you sell your software? And what is your typical SLA that you want to deliver?
Mm-hmm.
I had it once at a really an ISV who went like, yeah, but we are giving a 100% uptime. Good luck with that, because we don't even provide a 100% uptime.
That's right.
And guess what? All the components that you're going to use are going to lower your uptime. Yeah, but we're having multiple zones and we're having multiple regions, and will not help. I mean, if your SLA, your calculated SLA is bounded to the lowest SLA that we offer as a service, so you cannot go up there, right? And even then, who said that your software is really designed in the most correct way? So it's a discussion that you need to have with them, and it's good that you bring it up. To what level do you go? I typically go for, if you can make sure that you have a resiliency where you can say, I can sleep sane at night without having to wake up and having to quick flip and start putting out fires in the middle of the night, then that resiliency level has been reached for me. And will it adhere to your business model where you will not have a financial hangover? Then you're successful in my eyes when it comes down to resilience. So it does come down to technique at some point, because you need to implement some of these things. And it doesn't only go over the infrastructure that you're running, but it also goes on how do you cope with the monitoring on top of that? What is your continuous feedback loop on those? Because that's also very important, because this will also give you a good idea of how your resiliency is handling. If your software is speedy on high speed infrastructure, but your software is slacking because they are doing like lazy loading capabilities and all these things, I don't think the feedback loop will also be positive, right? I mean, that's a thing. If you have a really lazy loading application, also there your resiliency will be bad. Why? Because it also has an impact on the speed, and it gives an impression that there's something wrong with the underlying infrastructure. But maybe you're just having 200 connections open to your database or to your API, which will lower down, and you're throttling your own API. So it's also those things that come to play. So you need to monitor those at the most convenient way. And not only monitoring, and this is a little bit where we as Microsoft today are lacking, or at least I'd like to think so. We don't monitor on the functional level of your application. We only monitor on the infrastructure, and we monitor on the logical part of your applications. We can have application insights with all the insights on your app, and enriched with Log4j or Log4net or whatever we can do, or even have observability through OpenTelemetry and all these things. But it will not give you an insight on how long is my message A taking before it can be totally processed by service B, and what is the queue linked, and how do these things work. So real BAM monitoring, we don't do that.
Yeah,
we used to have something similar in BizTalk. We had BAM monitoring there, and on old school. But BizTalk we laugh with BizTalk just as we laugh with SharePoint, but they're both very successful products, and they're very enterprisey products, and they're not to be underestimated in the capabilities that they have. Although I rather not work with SharePoint from that point of view, but that's a different story. But the thing that BizTalk gave us was real business application monitoring, seeing how business processes would also come into play. And it's all these things combined that you need to bring back to the ISV and saying, you're building a SaaS. How do you want to sell it to your customers? How do you want to go along with your customers? And even more important, what is your take on it if you want to onboard customers, and how long do you want to take it? You want to add additional stuff to that? You want to make it sure that they can do their own stuff, or is it you that are going to implement it without actually having to do a full implementation? The software deployment is be like, here, shut up, take my money, here's my credit card, I want to use your software. But if you then as a company want to add to, but we're going to help you configure and understand your business processes, because there's an entire thing behind that, this process cycle, fine by me. But that's a different story, right? But it also comes to play because the more configuration you have, the heavier the processes will be. So that also needs to come to play with those customers. So, and that for me is also part of your full story if you're talking about resiliency and building for failure, because this will bring your success.
I'm glad that you brought up the point of functional monitoring as it comes to resiliency, because I've noticed that, and you're right about that. And I think probably the majority of the developers listening to this podcast have never encountered BizTalk in their professional world, just because it was kind of on its way out in the early 2000s from a popularity perspective. But it was a broker style messaging system, but to use it, you had to take functions of the software, and you had to create a message, or you had to create a little file with data that said this thing needs to happen, and then it would route somewhere and somebody else would do it. Same thing as web services, where we have an HTTP file, packet that goes across, or a queue, a message in a queue. It's a little JSON bundle that says something needs to happen, and here's some data to go along with it. But even within a single web application, What certainly I've thought about that, but what patterns do you advise your customers on to make that kind of thing happen, where now we can hook up existing monitoring tools to get that functional level of monitoring? What do the coders have to do a little bit differently?
It's a good one. And luckily, I can actually point them to something now, because we have something on paper that can actually help them, and which I'm happy that we did. Something that I helped writing, but it's something that I've been talking about a lot, and it's called the Reliable Web application, and it talks about actually the success, the 12 factored app. It takes that into account, and we talk about like a circuit breaker, like all these things, like these application patterns that you need to implement. And it will give indeed a guidance framework to developers to see, look, you need to look into this, you need to look into that. And we have them for both .NET and for Java. They're still a work of continuation, and they fall under what we call the well-architected framework. Because this is the next level. This is actually the level below the Azure infrastructure, because this really talks about your app, but it's really focused on how we can implement that inside of the Azure building blocks together with the application that you're building. And just to give you an idea, there's a transient fault and fault retry element in the connection that we have to SQL Server, which is out of the box available, but you need to apply it if you don't know about it. And of course, you need to implement certain factors on the SQL Server itself too. Failover groups will help you there, always on capabilities. Making these things work a little bit better and making it a little bit more resilient in the end as an application again. And then for the observability part, I would strongly suggest take a look at, of course, look into a correct monitoring. If you're writing away errors, that should be a thing. I mean, you should always do exception handling. There's still too many people that don't do that. Go figure. But there's still this thing of we handle exceptions, but we don't do all exception handling. And that's a little bit of thing. And I see that happening way too much. I think I even saw, I think it was Yves Roeleven this week who also posted something on LinkedIn regarding to that. And I said, yeah, actually, you're right. I see too many of these things still happening. So that's not something that you should be neglecting. And you should monitor those things, but you should also monitor your functional faults, writing those away, and making sure that you have an observability pattern on top of that. How can you do this? Well, typically you can take a look at, you can combine a couple of practicalities. If you're doing .NET, think about things like implementing a service mesh to see how your communication is flowing, and then pick up some of the signals that you have in there. That could be either an STO, or that could be open service mesh that we have. And maybe try to have a little bit of Dapper on top of that. Just sprinkle some Dapper over it to make your deployments a little bit easier. But also there's
that's
capabilities.
DAPR, not the Dapper ORM, right?
Yeah, exactly. But you can, these things will adhere to the technical monitoring, but also give you a little bit of better understanding how communication between services run. But you still need to implement the real functional part. There's a real cool ISV solution for that actually does that in a neat way. I don't know if you ever heard about them. There's Serverless 360, which has a really good capability of hooking into the APIs that you have, and then you say, well, we also need to monitor that service bus, and they will actually bring you up a mapping and give you a good overview of what you need to start monitoring from a functional point of view. Today, I hear a lot about observability through mainly open telemetry, but again, that's just technical monitoring of how the communication is being set up. You don't have full flow going through there. So it's all these things combined. And again, as I mentioned earlier, we don't have a single shot solution at Microsoft yet. I do know that Kent Weir last year opened up a public survey on if we were going to make business application monitoring, would you be happy with that, and what would it look like? And it was a Microsoft form survey that they ran out. It's about a year ago. I don't know where they are with that thing. That gave me hope because that would be something that could start spinning up, hopefully anytime soon.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, we could go on about this topic, but
unfortunately,
I'm going to make sure that we include the links in the show notes that we talked about, those 12 patterns for web application resiliency and serverless 360 and the rest of the stuff we talked about. But for developers who have heard you, just heard you talk about this and realized, wow, there's a lot of stuff that I wasn't aware of. I need to go and figure out what all this stuff means. How would you recommend they go, and if they're at the beginning of this journey of learning about this topic, any go-to resources that they should make sure not to miss?
Hey, ChatGPT, right?
So, the new Google?
No. Yeah, something like that. Yeah. A big chat enterprise, let's call it that. There's actually a website called, if you want to read about the 12 factor apps, there's actually a website on that, 12factor.net. Which I think it's 12factor.net. Let me check on that. Where you can also look at all the patterns that are being brought up there. Yeah, it's that one. And we also have, I will paste it, I will give it to you in the chat. Also, the other one, there's also on the Microsoft Learn pages, there's reliable web applications for .NET and for Java. So those are 2 pages combined with a GitHub repository with some sample code in there. And that's not all. You also, if you want to get started, start by looking at, there's still older things that come to play again. I think about things like Gang of 4, things that we don't really discuss anymore, but that are still valid in software design. And that can be reapplied in modern software design. Although we do have a lot of these things already out of the box. Think about all the patterns that are being natively generated inside of things like .NET and Java. That nowadays we don't have to do them ourselves anymore. In the early days of OO, that was like ooh, right? But frameworks given, SDKs given, we do a lot of handling. To give you an idea, most of the patterns that you use when using authentication identity systems, we can just bypass them by implementing things like the MSOL framework, for instance, for identity. So the Microsoft authentication libraries to make it easier for you to onboard, and you already have the concept of flows going back and forth just by using that SDK. So you can avoid a lot of these things. So do you need to know about everything in there? No, but it will make you understand why things work the way they work, and it will make you think out loud on how certain things have been designed and how you can benefit from that to make it your software even better, because you're already starting by applying a design which is proven, right?
Yeah, right. That's a good point. Yeah, so many great libraries that have effectively, the library exists to implement a pattern. And then by using it, you're basically forced into the pattern.
Yes, exactly. But think about the patterns too, and look at some standard patterns that always come back. Singleton, circuit breaker. I've been repeating myself over and over, but these patterns, they come back and forth. And if you comprehend and understand how they work, your insights into software will become a little bit easier and even applicable to other stuff too.
Yeah, nice. Well, thanks so much, Mike, for coming on the show and letting me and the listeners learn from all of your years of experience and all your interactions with big ISV Microsoft customers as they're trying to use Azure in the best manner possible. This was great.
Yeah, this is a lot of fun. I mean, we should do this more often, but next time with a beer in real life.
Some Belgian beer.
Awesome. Belgian beer, yeah. The funny thing is, I don't drink anymore, so that would make it a little bit awkward. Just you with the beer alone, but the Belgian will bring it in.
Yeah, I love hot tea. I know the British are big. I think they're still big on tea time. In the U.S. and the South, it was big on iced tea, but I love tea. Coffee? I drink tea instead. I mean, beer. I'm just as happy with tea.
All right, we have a coffee and a tea then, because I drink the coffee, unfortunately.
Yeah. Nice. Awesome.
This was really fun, and I
definitely
thank you again for having me on the show. And was something I was looking forward to this week. Really true.
My pleasure. And until next time, keep shipping.
You've been listening to the Azure DevOps Podcast, a show for developers and DevOps professionals shipping software using Microsoft technologies. Go to www.azuredevops.show for show notes and other episodes. On behalf of your host, Jeffrey Palermo, and our sponsors, thanks for listening, and may God bless you.